asking 19.5 million, and make sure this is said because Rick won't say, but Rick told me earlier he thought it was grotesquely underpriced.
That's right.
Rick, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much to Alison Gray of Citizens Bank, who has facilitated this gallery, and that's Alison. If you have any questions around money without nothing from buildings. So thank you for braving the cold elements. I know a lot of you would have preferred maybe staying at home, but Rick Cook is a huge draw. And I'm not going to give you a historical biographical breakdown of Rick's career, but it is truly a remarkable career. And I think as agents, we've received a lot of calls over the last few days with this invitation saying, how could you invite Rick Cook, who is the architect of the building directly next door to you? And we just have such enormous respect for Rick because he designed a beautiful building as a neighbor, number one. Number two, we love collaborating with all our colleagues, whether they are competitors or not. And most importantly, Rick has had such an enormous impact on the architectural landscape of the city. And I actually am going to apply for the job in public relations at Cook Fox because I think he is the most under-celebrated talent of our time. And the volume of buildings that have been put together is pretty exceptional. The variety and the quality is pretty astounding. My exposure to Rick started many years ago when I was just a small kid. 99 Jane Street was being developed. I was 15 years old maybe. Wow. And I was, who's this architect? Because it just sat back from the street. There was water features and there were gardens in front of it. And this was not developed as a super ultra high-end building. And I thought, wow, that's a big shift from where I saw other developments happening in New York. And then I was reintroduced to Rick a few years later at the earliest development stages of 150 Charles Street. And you really get to know the quality of an architect when you work with them closely. And it was astounding to see the level of detail, thought, and care that went into designing 150 Charles Street, which is one of the more complex buildings of our time. But Rick not only designed a beautiful building that won a host of accolades, most importantly to everyone in this room, those penthouses have resold for numbers that are eye-popping, not only compared to what they had originally sold for in a market where certain properties have not resold for big numbers, but more importantly because they were selling in a very difficult market and just showcased how extraordinary design always has been. So without further ado, welcome Rick Cook. So Rick, the first question I would have for you is, your history of architecture is so varied. So many architects seem to specialize in one thing or another. But if you look at the variety of buildings you've done, residential, commercial, I mean, Rick just recently designed, am I correct, the Bruce Springsteen Museum? I mean, an extraordinary variety of work and an unbelievable ability to do both very modern and contemporary. Oh, thanks. Everyone wants to switch to me. The variety of your ability to do both historic as well as modern. Tell us a little bit about your trajectory from, maybe not at the very beginning, but how you approach architecture and how you have this ability not to be too much of a dictator, because a lot of architects are dictators. Rick is actually a listener and then a dictator.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
Take this one, this is the better one. I don't know what's happening.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Thank you all for being here on this freezing cold night. So where did it come from? I fell in love with New York City and I wanted to come here and I wanted to be an architect. And it's not that easy to apply your art form, the thing that you care about. And what I kind of stumbled into was that there were sites that developers owned in landmark districts, what I call the missing teeth of the street wall, parking lots in beautiful neighborhoods. And I wanted to repair the street wall, make our street better, make a better place. And we happened to be able to deal with developers and present buildings that were meaningful to us. Simple things like, how does a building meet the street wall? How does it meet the ground? How does it meet the sky? How does it relate to the buildings next to it? And that language that we loved was something that we were able to use at landmarks, and when the developers were able to get their buildings approved, they were happy. And we did a string of buildings that were really filling in street walls in landmark districts. And that work, it was related to preservation, also doing new buildings, but it was also in some ways a stewardship ethic, an ethic of taking care of things. And that morphed into the environmental movement, because that's also a stewardship ethic, leaving things better than the way that you found them. And the real breakthrough project there was something called the Center for Wellbeing at East Hamilton. And there was a woman who wanted to change education in America, a woman named Courtney Sale Ross, and she wanted to design the Center for Wellbeing for the centerpiece of the campus. And the idea at the time was that architecture had been obsessed with the visual. You look at pictures, you look at magazines, but we experience architecture with all of our senses. We feel spaces, you smell spaces. And so this idea that you could experience architecture with all of your senses became the backbone of that project and morphed into something that we now call biophilic design. So what does it feel like when you take your shoes off and you walk on a surface? What does it feel like when you touch something? What's the texture of it? Literally, what does it smell like when you walk into the building? So we had a fireplace, the only fireplace that I know of at a school in New York State. They would bake flatbreads in the morning, and part of that was for that experience. And then we put the cafe up on the second floor, and that was only because you could open the windows and hear the birds in the trees. It was wildly inefficient in that you had to double handle everything, but it was about that experience, about being in the treetops and hearing birds. So that started this pursuit of what we now call biophilic design, finding a way to pursue architecture with all of your senses.
But biophilic design, I think you would see in a lot of your maybe smaller buildings or humanly scaled buildings, and then you look at a building like Bank of America. I don't know if you know Bank of America, One Bryant Park, one of the most iconic buildings in all of Manhattan skyline. And that was designed 20 years ago, 2 decades ago, and is still one of the most energy efficient green buildings ever, and it really encompasses a lot of what you just described.
One Bryant Park was our big breakthrough project. 2.2 million square feet. The Bank of America was a joint venture partner involved, a partnership with the state. And at that time, the Durst family had done what was called 4 Times Square of the Condé Nast building as the first green skyscraper in New York City with my former partner, Bob Fox. And we had the blessing of working with a family who were second generation green builders. At the Condé Nast building, it was about photovoltaics and fuel cells and a few other things. But what they discovered was that they could make the air quality much better. So this idea that you could start out in life trying to make buildings better for the planet, lower energy and less carbon production, which is still what we're focused in on now. We could do all that, but in the process, what we discovered is that we could make buildings quantifiably better for people, better air quality, better connection to views and nature. And so that became the driving force at One Bryant Park, and we explored every technology that was available in the market. At one time we were going to have a wind turbine on the top, and that came apart. We even had an anaerobic digester to take all the waste, but we couldn't take the paper waste from the bank, and that wasn't an approved way to dispose of banking records. But we did everything we possibly could, focusing on the most advanced building we could at the time, and it ended up being LEED Platinum under the U.S. Green Building Council's LEED rating system. It was the first LEED Platinum commercial skyscraper in the world. But we didn't set out to get a rating, we set out to do the best building we possibly could. And a big part of that was about how people felt in the building. So floor to ceiling glass, like in this building, and the highest possible quality air, very high filtration. At the top of One Bryant Park, there's a filter bank bigger than this room that takes all the air in and filters it and delivers it down to the building. And one of the sayings at the time was, the air leaving the building is cleaner than the air coming in.
which would be good for agents with a lot of hot air. So,
Yeah.
the good thing with these buildings is, we talk about green and we talk about aesthetics, but when you take art and mix it with commerce, the chances of that multiplying becomes so much more impactful. And the success of these buildings is truly what impresses me the most, because I feel when you have a success story, you have buy-in. And you have buy-in when you can convince skeptics of your philosophy because they have commercial sensibility and they actually function well. That's when I think things become very interesting. And the rents at One Bryant Park, very, very high. The quality of life in the building, extraordinary. And more impressive is how many people have copied you since then. Because if you look at this wave of new commercial office buildings being built right now that are leasing at exceptional figures while others sit empty. I personally had experience at 150 Charles Street where Rick insisted on having filtered fresh air in the building, and much to the chagrin of the developer who did not want to spend the extra few $1 million to do so, Rick said it's either fresh air or I'm out of here, and we got fresh air, and the people who are living in the building actually do notice a difference. I noticed a difference. Quality of life has become such a big part of living right now, and people underestimate what architecture does in helping you define a quality of life. You're building in, you're redefining neighborhoods right now. In Brooklyn, tell us a little bit more about what's happening over there, because the Domino's Sugar Factory is going to be probably one of the most memorable new buildings on Skyline.
Yeah, and that's another example. The Relentis family, Jed and David, they built their own buildings, which was a very unique experience. A lot of times we have the architect conceiving the building, the brokers talking about the marketplace, the developers, and then the big missing link is how much is all of this going to cost, and then there's the construction management and the general contractors, and there's a big disconnect about the aspirational goals and then what you can actually pay for. It's always the battle in all these projects. And one of the things that was interesting when we did the Domino Sugar Project, what's now called 10 Grand, which is a workplace building, and 1 South First Street, which is residential, is that we had this idea about this passive solar facade, this very deep cast stone facade, and how it would react. And we spent so much time building these complex computer models now, and by the time it gets bid and awarded, everybody starts all over again, and you're back to basically rubbing sticks together again and starting all over. Right. But because Two Trees were the owner and builder, they went out and paid design assist fees for us to work with this amazing precast contractor called Gate. And they built upon our computer models, and then we brought in Skyline windows and we loaded in their computer modeling. And one thing led to another. It was the first time ever in our life where all of this hard work and the technologies continued to build on it, and at the same time they were pricing back and forth, until finally we had such incredible computer models of this exterior wall that we ended up doing full-scale 3D plastic printed molds by Oak Ridge Laboratory, which was the first time that had ever been done as an experiment. And this kind of integrated delivery was an enormous breakthrough, and a lot of it had to do just with a different structure on how the owner and builder were structured. It allowed us more freedom to accomplish something that we wanted to do. We're really very proud of what was accomplished there. The other thing about that was that the building is a mixed-use building. So the building that kind of goes up and around is residential, and on the side is the office building, and then there's a low podium over the Domino Park, if you've seen that. There's a low podium, pool, and that's shared by both uses and the workplace. So that was a really interesting project, and we were happy to help them complete the Domino Park.
Well, I think it's a very important message about a subject I speak to often, which is the combination of high tech and high touch. These are inevitably homes that have to be lived in, a very human experience, but it's in the high technology that you have a tremendous opportunity to advance the cause of a better quality of life. So you have been a trailblazer on many fronts. The one that really impressed me tremendously, which I think was the fire that started a global retail trend, and you might not want to accept this. I'm going to do PR for you. I've got a new job. But your Apple store in the meatpacking district was a trailblazer in that it took a technology company into the retail realm in a style of retailing that had never happened before anywhere in the world, and has been copied globally. How did that project come about?
We had done work for Taconic Partners, Charlie Bender.
Ex-Google building in Chelsea.
And that's actually how we met Google. We're just next month, 3,200 Googlers are going to show up for work at the new Google building across from Pier 40 that we've been working on for a long time. But anyway, Taconic bought the Western Beef building on the corner of 9th and 14th. And it was a landmarks presentation. Very, very difficult project because you get a very long view of it, big sign at the corner. So we designed this very elegant little penthouse on the top and designed the windows and a lot of community engagement. And we got the landmarks approval, which was great. And the top floor immediately rented for the highest rent south of 42nd Street in the history of New York. And it had a sign going through the corner office. And what that was about was it had outdoor space and it was connected to place. That penthouse, you felt like you were part of the meatpacking district. So we knew that there was something special. People were willing to pay more than the top of a skyscraper in Midtown to be low down with a sign ripping through the corner office because it had outdoor space and it really felt like it was part of a place. So then pretty quickly, at that time, Steve Jobs was really involved in you talked about high touch, every little detail. And my little brush with Steve Jobs was, I never met him, but we had this whole back and forth between,
Without Zoom.
Without Zoom, it was through something in between. So he wanted to cut a big hole and take a column out to put that glass stair in. By the way, when you checked into that glass stair, Steve Jobs had the patent on all those connections. It was really Steve's work. So I would say, tell Mr. Jobs that building will fall down. And so they come back, and he comes back and goes, you tell Mr. Cook, they call him, go away, and keep building them. So it's like we went back and forth like this. So then he first had a couple of floors, and then he wanted the cellar, and the cellar was 7 foot high. You couldn't get it, you had to duck down the basement. And there was a whole building over there. And he said, no, I need 9-foot ceiling heights cleared. It's like, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard of. So I came up with something else, like, we're gonna be down there, people will be down there with like tablespoons and compound buckets digging it out. And he said, you tell Mr. Cook, just go ahead and do it. So it goes back and forth like this and it became a little bit funny. And so then he obviously got tired of my little back and forth. And he said, you tell Mr. Cook that he doesn't understand what I'm about to do. That he doesn't understand what I mean by retail. If I'm right, there will be a line around the block waiting to get in the day this store opens. And so I'm an information freak. I went by every day for 2 weeks in the morning, and the line went all the way from 9th Avenue to 10th Avenue, back up to 15th Street, and disappeared going back up 15th Street. Every day for 2 weeks waiting to get into that store.
But I heard they weren't coming for the Apple products. I thought they just went to see the architect.
Yeah, that's right. And then he didn't rent the penthouse. They rented the rest of the building, but he couldn't get the penthouse because somebody else had rented it already before that. But it was interesting, again, it's about vision. I talked about 2 trees and leadership and vision, and Steve had this idea that it was not about square footage. It was about associating a brand and a location and a look and a feel. So you talked about high touch. It had to look right, it had to feel right. The meatpacking district was the right place. And the way that we did the restoration of the building was brand appropriate. In fact, at the same time, his leasing team came and leased, at the exact same time, leased a space on 34th Street. And he came to town for our project, went to 34th Street, he said, cancel the lease. I was like, we can't. And he's like, it's fine, pay it, whatever you have to do, but my brand is not going on 34th Street. So this idea about the look and feel, the magic, it's not about bricks and mortar, it's a little bit about the love and magic, about how the brand feels.
Well, I do think it's a big message about how quality design does indeed drive valuation. And we've seen this again and again and again, because I think about 15, 20 years ago, there was a drumbeat of narrative about how starchitecture was really just a fad. People were overpaying dramatically, and now you're actually seeing repeatedly resales in starchitect buildings that are not only gaining in value, but are soaring past competitors where the architecture is mediocre at best. You have really helped redefine entire neighborhoods, and I recall many years ago how Hudson Square was over there and was automatically associated with FedEx and UPS, and was really not a neighborhood at all. And today, a few years later, you look at 555 Greenwich, 100 Van Dam, and not to mention the St. John's Terminal Google building. These are millions of square feet that have revolutionized an entire neighborhood. And then comes your next project, which I think a lot of people in this room are very interested to know more about, which is the twin, we're calling them the new Twin Towers of the West, far west, southwest village, we'll call it. Tell us a little bit more about that project, or are you not, are you sworn to secrecy?
No, I'm happy to tell you what I can. The St. John's Terminal project, I've been on for 15 years. So that just gives you an idea about how much time and effort goes into these projects. We did the, what's called the ULURP, the Uniform Land Use Review process, was completed in 2016.
Oh my God.
and so it was just one of these projects that you felt like you were born to do. Those of you from downtown might remember that the St. John's Terminal spanned over Houston Street, so it was that dark gauntlet getting to Pier 40. It really cut us off from our waterfront. And so I talked earlier about how I saw empty parking lots and holes in our street walls where I just wanted to do a good building and move on with life. And so the streets would be better. This was the one place in all of New York City that I wanted to take a building away. I wanted to take away that part of St. John's Terminal that spanned over Houston Street and created that dark tunnel. So we had a chance to do that in the ULURP process. In fact, the original ULURP had a very complex program all the way from the south, all the way across Houston and to Clarkson on the north. And what you might have seen if you've seen images of our building called Pixelated Mountain, that went on the south side also. But because of the change of the marketplace and the demand for large floor plate, super high-tech space, at the last minute we did something called a hybrid scenario, which set up the conditions for Google to end up signing a lease, also the highest lease in the history of New York in aggregate value, with Oxford Realty, who had developed the project, and then ultimately buy the building for $2.1 billion. And so that's the Google building on the south that we did. On the north, that approval of the two shaped towers was approved back in 2016. So the idea there was that value was created in some ways from 150 Charles, that one of the ways to create value and by value I also mean quality of life. And so I think that translates into sales price. And we all know the story of today is the best quality office space is still renting at record-breaking rents, and you can buy a bad office building for 10 cents on the dollar. So this separation between mediocre and the best has never been more dramatic. So we knew at 150 Charles that sold, what was the data on 150 Charles?
Well, the expectation was to be as close to 3,000 as possible. I think we averaged close to $3,600 a square foot.
And the timing was, the way I tell the story, the timing was as fast as you could make appointments in the sales office.
3 months sell-out was $750 million worth of real estate, and that's about 10 years ago.
So we knew that that this idea of connecting to outdoor space, connecting to views, connecting to multiple exposures was successful at 150. In fact, one of the big controversies that we have is that when we design these setbacks and these beautiful terraces, we render them heavily planted. But then oftentimes they're like, well, we'll just pave it and then the tenant will, bring some planting in. And at 150, that's more than the fresh air. I was like, it is so critically important that we do the planting. We design it down to every plant species. And for the first time in New York City, the plantings on those roof terraces at 150 were a requirement for the C of O, like exit lights and exit stairs. It was written right into the approval for that project. So it was really important. And for me, it was important to me. I thought it was going to make an enormous difference in the building. But what happened was, and watching the sales happen, was when people came in and saw the model, and they said, I mean, if I buy this apartment, I'm looking at exactly that planting down below, exactly that's what has to be built. It's not something that you're rendering. And the answer was yes, and I think it made it much easier.
Well, then the next part of it was we made it even easier in that all the terraces at 150 are maintained for by one company that does all of the terraces. It's included in the small payments in your common charges.
Yeah.
So not only do you have a consistency of terraces that are maintained, and the cost is a fraction compared to if you were doing it on your own.
So anyway, that was a background for how did we conceive the building on the north, between Clarkson and West Houston, which in general was deemed the best remaining waterfront site in the village, so far southwest corner of the village. So we designed 2 towers that were offset, and we call it pixelated now, but a series of setbacks. So one of the interesting things about the value creation there was an enormous percentage of the apartments have outdoor space, but also more than half of all the real estate is higher than the penthouse at 160 Leroy. So 160 Leroy was great. I love the building. I think it's a beautiful building, and we wanted a building that would sit well between the Google building and 160 Leroy. And 160 Leroy also did extremely well because of the quality of the design.
Herzog de Meuron.
Yeah, Herzog de Meuron. And Ian Schrager. So the rest of the puzzle was God's gift to a New York City architect. It's limestone. So we designed this nice abstract limestone grid on the building, lots and lots of outdoor space, beautiful rich bronze mullions, and then Atlas Capital, which was on the job all the way from the beginning, brought in Zeckendorf Development, Arthur and Will, into the deal, and now they're 50-50 partners developing the building, which is designed to be the 15 Central Park West of the West Village. Also interesting, the project also enabled the absolute best senior affordable housing project in the village. So on Washington Street, there's a completely standalone building that enter off of Washington, which will be the best senior affordable housing project in the village. That was really important to Corey Johnson, who was the city council member at the time.
Well, I think the building, and the reason I bring it up, is the fact that that neighborhood right now, even 10 years ago, was considered hell. No one wanted to live there, no one even thought you could live there. And it just showcases how a few buildings later, the dust settles, the scaffolding comes down, and all of a sudden you have this thriving neighborhood. We are witnessing it right over here on Park Row. We're next door, we did 25 Park Row, which we love, by the way, because certainly we didn't want a vacant lot next door. And the fact that you have all these buildings having filled up all these vacant openings really does make a tremendous difference. And then all of a sudden, everyone looks at the neighborhood with a different set of eyes. But it's interesting to note how the jaded eyes like mine think of this as J&R music land.
Yeah.
But a lot of the agents who are coming here and selling in this building who didn't know what J&R music was, don't even think about it that way. They look at 25, they look at us, they look at Beekman, they look at the Woolworth, 30 Park Place, and they see this thriving neighborhood around the park. So do you find it's a great opportunity to actually do multiple buildings in a location so that you actually can have this huge impact as opposed to a small impact? Or does it not matter?
It was really incremental. It just happened. In fact, one of the funny stories about the people involved in our business, you meet so many interesting people. Rochelle, the R at J&R, was partner in 25 Park Row and had a big white piano signed by Lady Gaga. So that was the thing. And you just meet such interesting people in this business. And by the way, the building next door is designed to sit really nicely next to this building, which I love, by the way. And so the buildings were designed to create a new street wall on the park.
Yeah, they blend very well together. Sometimes I actually take photos of buildings in New York where I go, whoa, that's really a contrast to that next door. And I do think the fact that your buildings have a respect for their environment is something that seems consistent with almost everything you design.
Yeah, but we've tried. Back to Hudson Square, we had a project that's been going on for a long time. The old Mount Morris Electric Light Factory was a beautiful masonry base, and it was next to a social services building at the time. And I got a call from this guy. Actually, I got a call from somebody saying this developer from Palm Beach is going to call you. He has very, very short attention span. But he's talked to everybody. He's talked to Norman Foster. He's talked to everybody. But he's going to call you. But you tell your receptionist, you know, that he's going to be calling because he has the shortest attention span that anybody you've ever met. And so one day somebody comes in and goes, yeah, this guy called for you, Rick, but you know, I put him on hold and I went back 2 minutes later and he hung up. And I'm like, yeah, you know, that must be this guy, Jeff Green. And so finally Jeff Green calls back and he gets me, I get on the phone, I know it'll put it right through, and he starts talking to me and I say, well listen Jeff, I've looked at the site and it's not landmark, you have every right to tear the building down and build a brand new building, but I'm not interested in doing the project if it means tearing down that beautiful Mount Morris Electric plant. Beautiful. It's like, what? Why is that? I think it'll be a much more beautiful building if it meets the street wall, has a sense of history, we can do something with layers of time. And I went into this whole long thing. And he started asking me questions back and forth. And somewhere in there, he said, where are you from? And I was like, you know, I grew up in upstate New York and Hudson Valley. And then he'd go back and he talks to me about something else, and he goes, that's not where you're from. Where are you born? And I said, you know, Worcester, Massachusetts. And he's like, yeah. And then he asked me another thing, goes on and talks about something else. And we're talking about something else, about the planning and building. He goes, what hospital? So I'm like, what? And he goes, what hospital? He goes, you know, Hamden Hospital. I was born at Worcester General. And that started this whole thing with Jeff. So we designed the building, went out for a really long time. Any of you who've been through the building with 100 Van Dam. We designed the building, green terraces on every floor, interesting kind of lofts at the base, and then more modern apartments, nice views. And we've been going through the whole thing. And he calls me up and he goes, Rick, I can't sell this building. I can't sell apartments in the building. I'm like, why not, Jeff? He goes, then I have to pay taxes. So the rest of the story is that one of the apartments at 100 Van Dam is just rented for $150,000 a month, the most expensive rental apartment in the history of New York, and what the neighborhood that used to think was what you call scary. What you call it? And Google was in the building next door, but it was a social services building. Now Google's in the building next door, 315 Hudson, and somebody paid the highest rent ever in the history of New York.
Wow.
It's a beautiful terrace, by the way, but beautiful, beautiful outdoor space.
And now you're working on an amazing loft building up at 25th Street and between 10th and 11th and 12th Avenue, right? 11th Avenue and the West Side Highway. You've forgotten that one. The huge warehouse, Blackstone, that's what, a million square feet?
Oh,
that one.
Yeah, no, yeah, terminal.
It's a beauty, by the way.
Terminal warehouse.
The terminal warehouse.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a, yeah, thank you. It's just north of the Stair Lehigh building. And it was the home of the Tunnel nightclub originally. And it's just a remarkable building. Similar to the St. John's Terminal, where the rails came in on the second floor, and it was 850 feet long. The rails came in on the second floor, and that's what you see, what we cut through. Gordon Clark was one of my favorite artists, so it was a little bit of an homage to his work of cutting the buildings. And then Hammonds did the Day's End with Whitney, so it was kind of like things out there in the universe. So that cut through on the north end, exposing the rail beds, was a fun moment for us because we had good engineering drawings of the rail bed, so we were able to render it and show people exactly what it would be when we cut through. Anyway, the terminal is also a building that was designed for the rails to come in through the tunnel, and then the spacing of there are 25 stores inside and 4 blocks, and they're all proportioned on the scale of the rail cars at the time. So the trains would come in and the siding would open, and the openings in the side would feed into stores, which were fireproof stores. In fact, Stanford White, the great American architect and also interior designer and seller of antiques, would keep his goods in the terminal warehouse and resell them from there. So we had the opportunity to carve into the middle of the terminal warehouse and do what's called a floor area reallocation, balancing the floor area. So we did the overbuild on top, but the overbuild on top, if you look at it, each one of those pieces is proportioned the size of a rail car, the kind of glass cubes on top of it, and we pulled the courtyard all the way down. Massive heavy timbers, and at one time we were looking at these incredible massive timbers, and I'm thinking this building was built in 1891, and the timber is so huge, the tree must have been a couple hundred years old. So I live in a neighborhood called Steams Landing up on the Hudson River, and immediately adjacent is Lamont Earth Observatory of Columbia University, and the tree ring lab of the world there on the Lamont campus happened to be run by a guy named Professor Cook, and no relation. And so we got tree ring analysis done, and they dated the timbers in the terminal warehouse to 1516.
Wow.
In Alabama longleaf pine forest. So this sense of history and connection to place is really deep and rich there, as well as the highest tag, greatest new workplace kind of building possible.
Our marble, by the way, dates back to BC, just so you know. Question time. Is there anyone who has questions for Rick at this juncture? I mean, there are 1,000 more questions we can ask. Anyone? Questions? This is so hard. Kenny.
With no budget in mind, what would be your personal dream project? And where would it be?
Well, what we're fascinated with right now are projects that are restorative and regenerative. So a lot of the green roof work is about reknitting the ecosystem. So believe it or not, the work that would be really motivating for us is to take a truly terrible site and reknit the ecosystem, restorative, regenerative. So really making a repair, doing something that we know how to do now. We know how quickly. Our own office on 6th Avenue and 20th Street, we put a green roof. We didn't really know what we're doing. Next thing you know, little bugs come, and then birds come following that. And by the time we moved out, North American Kestrel would come to hunt our roof.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and then when we moved to 57th Street, we built our gardens, and just seeing how life follows life. It's so simple, really. Let nature do its thing. Let nature repair the scars. So for me, the dream project is one that takes a kind of restorative, regenerative approach towards a previously harmed site. That's kind of the dream project. It doesn't really make any difference what it is, but we have a huge housing crisis. All people who study this tell us that we are 500,000 units short of housing at all income ranges, and so it seems like one of our greatest needs. And at the moment, there's things that the politicians are in charge of. But right now, if you ask any developer without 421A, they're not building any rental housing. It's not possible to finance it. It's not my personal field of expertise, but I trust.
Allison, where's the money?
So I guess it would be housing on a site that's primary motivation is restorative or regenerative. And I think we're going to have compelling issues with sea level rise here. All the climate scientists are predicting significant issues. We're going to get more sandies. So I think we can do. Nature has always found a way to absorb surges of water, and they're called wetlands. And so I think that we're going to be doing that out of necessity soon around New York too.
It, by the way, was a trip to go visit Rick's office on 6th Avenue, because you would look out of the window and you thought it was surreal, because there was this full garden with a whole ecosystem in the middle of Manhattan on 6th Avenue. It was pretty remarkable. Rick, you just finished renovating your own personal home. Tell us a little bit more about what's important to you in your own home, because one always loves to see the home of an architect.
Yeah. So this month's Dwell magazine, January, February, there's an article about the house that we've been working on for 20 years. I never lived in a finished house in my life. Our boys are 22 years old now, and they never lived in a finished house. Architects, college kids have no shoes. And we live in this neighborhood I mentioned previously called Sneem's Landing on the Hudson River. And there was this somewhat unknown architect called Charlie Winter, who was our local modernist architect. So we bought this house on stilts with floor-to-ceiling glass. I just thought the proportion of the spaces were really great. So Ellen told the story to the reporter, this woman Amina from Dwell magazine, that when I first walked in, I said, wow, I've designed a space just like this, not double height, but story and a half, and the proportions were right. And I was telling Ellen about how much I loved it, and I had actually imagined a space like this. So of course, the title of the story now is Architect Designs House, but somebody did it better, or something. And so, not the tagline I was really looking for, but it was a house done in the 70s, and it was real. Charlie Winter was this wonderful modern architect, and he actually came. He was still alive at the time, and he came and walked through the house with us. And every house he had done had been on the edge of the Hudson River or on a ski slope where you entered on one side, and then the house opened up with glass on the other side. But this house was in the woods. I live on a road, literally called Woods Road. And he was interested in a house where the views were through the house, through and out through the house, up to the sky, through the gardens. And he was interested in these skewering views. So over 20 years, we've been renovating this house and trying to respect Charlie's ideas about these skewered views and connecting to the 14 patterns of biophilic design in our work. So if you're interested, Dwell magazine, January, February. If you don't have a subscription, you can go to Dwell Plus for free right now if you go out there. But it's a very it's a very warm, comfortable house, and a little terrifying for an architect, because to finish your house, it means that you think this is beautiful. You know, we tend to do projects like this, and then you do them and you move on to the next project and you move on to the next project. So coming home to your own house is always challenging. I think it's why many of us live in unfinished houses with projects.
What is the most important aspect to a house for you? If you were thinking of home, what as an architect is the first thing that comes to mind?
Under the theory of biophilic design, specifically the Savannah hypothesis, we need two conditions to feel comfortable. We need both prospect and refuge. So think of a front porch. Your overhead is covered, you know what's behind you, you're prospecting out to the world. So I believe the most important quality to a home is that it has these two qualities: that you feel safe, it's your home, you feel refuge, and for me, I desperately also need to have prospect, great view. So we have a house out in Amagansett, a little shack out in Amagansett. It also has floor-to-ceiling glass. No conventional window except for over the kitchen sink, and everything else is floor-to-ceiling glass. Our house in Sneem's is floor-to-ceiling glass, one window over the kitchen sink, everything else is floor-to-ceiling glass. So this idea that you can feel safe and feel part of the environment and see the weather and see nature is really important. And I think we all intuitively want those things: feel safe and be able to see out the world, like this. Our overhead's covered, and we're looking out. Also, by the way, one little plug: we wrote with our sister firm Terrapin Bright Green, the 14 patterns of biophilic design. If you go online and search 14 patterns of biophilic design, you can download the white paper for free. We wrote that 10 years ago, but we didn't have the science around awe. But we knew it would have been the 15th pattern, awe, and we've now got much better science around the human reaction to awe. If you stand right here in that little peak right there, that sense that you can stand on the edge of the world, you know you're safe, but it scares you a little bit. It's awe-inspiring. It's that thing you've all done. You walked in, you're like, wow, this is awesome. And we all know it intuitively true, but there's actually science around these things, that it's good for us. It's good for us to spark our imaginations. We know that better quality light that changes over time, circadian rhythms is good for us, helping us go to sleep at night. There are a lot of things that we're getting better and better science about. It's not just architects waving their hands and talking about biophilia, there's good science that's backing all of this up too.
Whoa. I'm trying to remember all of this. I'm thinking my little pea brain is exploding. Any other questions? Well, I think that's as much as any agent can take. Frankly, so Rick, I cannot thank you enough for being here tonight. And if anyone wants to see any of the apartments, we are actually selling real estate included in the package. We have a spectacular team in